Malignant narcissism is the quintessence of evil. That is a stark, genuinely chilling observation, right? It was made by psychoanalyst Erich Fromm way back in 1964. And honestly, it sets the perfect stage for exactly what we're going to do today. We aren't just going to look at bad behavior here. No, we are going to conduct a psychological autopsy of the fractured mind. We're going to dig deep beneath the surface of those toxic actions that completely destroy relationships and communities to find out what is actually happening in the deepest wiring of the human brain. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into fractured minds, deconstructing narcissism and perfectionism. Now, I want you to treat every single behavior we discuss today as a piece of evidence in a psychological investigation. We hear buzzwords like narcissist or perfectionist thrown around in pop culture literally every single day. But what is really happening beneath the surface of a fractured mind? To find the truth, we're taking a cinematic, investigative journey into the hidden neurobiological and evolutionary forces that drive some of the most dangerous, misunderstood human behaviors out there. We have to look past the superficial labels, you guys, and uncover the raw, primitive, and frankly, sometimes terrifying emotional drivers that dictate these actions. Okay, let's dive into this. Investigation Phase 1, the masks we wear. So, in clinical research, psychologists have found over 50 distinct labels describing pathological narcissism. 50. That's an absolute labyrinth of psychological profiling. But for our investigation today, we're going to slice right through the noise and focus on just the 4 primary subtypes. We're going to contrast what people see with what is actually happening. Let's start with grandiose narcissism. This is your classic profile, historically called the Don Juan character, or maybe your stereotypical egotistical CEO. Well, people see as someone who's socially charming, empowered, and usually highly successful, right? They walk into a room and just command attention. But what's actually happening? Well, beneath that thick-skinned illusion of superiority is a profound, almost paralyzing intolerance of criticism. They operate with absolute self-absorption, relying on aggressive manipulation to use others purely for personal gain. Make no mistake, they aren't connecting with you, they are extracting from you. Now, next up is communal narcissism. And what's really interesting about this one is it wasn't even formally recognized in the research until 2012. What people see here is the saintly helper, a self-perceived Mother Teresa, the ultimate community leader. But what is actually happening? It's a total wolf in sheep's clothing. At its core, this is still grandiose narcissism, but the dominance and deception are masked by these highly palatable, vulnerable qualities. They extract power by appearing incredibly helpful, while internally they are battling deep anxiety, shame, and severe separation insecurity. They don't just want followers, they want to build a cult of dependency. Then we have vulnerable narcissism. What people see is an introverted, unassuming, even fragile victim. This is the employee who is always complaining that they never get Employee of the Month, right? But what is actually happening? This whole woe is me stance is an incredibly complex defense mechanism. Secretly, they are wildly entitled and hypersensitive. They use their acute shame as an excuse to avoid putting in the actual hard work required to achieve the grandiose fantasies they're playing out in their heads. It is basically grandiosity without the courage to actually execute it. And finally, we reach malignant narcissism. What people see might be a ruthless, untouchable visionary. But what is actually happening is a truly chilling psychological reality defined by psychoanalyst Otto Kernberg. To be malignant, you have to have a combination of a narcissistic core, antisocial behaviors like lying and stealing, and egocentric sadism. And what that means is they actually align with and genuinely enjoy causing harm. Add in a paranoid orientation where they project their unresolved hatred onto others, viewing people as entirely disposable. This dark combination makes them the most physically harmful type of narcissist. But here's the absolutely crucial point. These 4 masks, grandiose, communal, vulnerable, and malignant, they're just the outer layer of our psychological autopsy. We need to go deeper. What is the insidious driver lurking beneath these narcissistic facades? Which brings us to investigation phase 2, the lethal flawlessness. This meta-analytic review, proving the undeniable empirical weight of the perfectionism-suicide relationship brilliantly and tragically, illustrates the dark reality of this psychological drive. It is profound evidence of just how deadly the quest for absolute flawlessness can be. In the Alaska Suicide Followback Study, researchers found that a staggering 56% of decedents were described by family and friends as perfectionistic. Think about that. When the narcissistic mind cannot achieve its grandiose illusions, the resulting crash isn't just sad, it's structurally devastating. So we can break the dimensions of perfectionistic risk down into three main categories. First, perfectionistic concerns. These are things like socially prescribed pressure and constant crippling doubts about your actions. Then there's perfectionistic strivings, which are the literally impossible personal standards someone sets for themselves. And finally, parental perceptions, involving relentless childhood criticism and unrealistic expectations. These aren't just quirky personality traits, guys. The research proves these self-generated and socially based pressures are literally a premorbid personality risk for suicide. It's a lethal psychological trap. Which leads us to a massive, glaring psychological mystery. Where does this desperate, life-or-death need for perfection and grandiosity actually come from? Well, we have to go back to childhood. Let's move to investigation phase 3, surviving basic anxiety. If we look at the groundbreaking developmental psychology of Karen Horney, she theorized that when a child grows up in an unsupportive, adverse environment, they develop this profound sense of isolation and helplessness. She called this basic anxiety. Now, to survive this terrifying feeling, the child unconsciously adopts rigid, neurotic coping mechanisms. They essentially have three choices. They either move towards others through total compliance, move against others through aggression and narcissism, or move away through complete aloofness. The real tragedy here is that these temporary survival strategies, well, they become permanent. To compensate for their basic anxiety, the child creates this idealized, grandiose self that completely overshadows and eventually alienates them from their true, authentic identity. Now, understanding that the narcissist is operating from a place of deep, unresolved childhood anxiety kind of changes our perspective, doesn't it? But it also opens up another profound question. If these behaviors are so rigid and destructive, why do highly capable, highly intelligent people stay in relationships with them? How do whole communities get swept up in the orbit of a communal or malignant narcissist? Let's take a look at the external devastation. The answer here isn't a logical failing on the victim's part. It is a biological hijacking. The neurobiology of a communal trauma bond completely bypasses cognitive logic. Intelligent victims don't stay because they're weak. They stay because this dynamic roots itself deep in our primitive survival circuits. You see, the narcissist frequently oscillates between intense, brilliant, grandiose fantasies and deep, empty dysfunction. This constant push and pull, this intermittent reinforcement, it chemically hooks the partner or the community. And we see this highly activated in public service or visibility contexts where the communal narcissist appears to be doing all this good work. The brain is basically kept in a perpetual state of stress and anticipated reward. Okay, we've reached the climax of our psychological autopsy. We've examined the masks, the perfectionistic drivers, the childhood anxieties, and the trauma bonds. Now it is time to unearth the tragic, fractured root of the narcissistic mind itself. Investigation phase 4, destroying the true self. Looking at this developmental timeline explains the exact mechanical breakdown of a human mind. According to researchers like Sam Vaknin, it starts in infancy, usually with severe trauma and abuse. This abuse forces the infant to withdraw, which causes actual physical dual flaws in spatial and language processing. As we move into toddlerhood, this leads to infant amnesia. They literally cannot process reality safely. By childhood, we see a total failure of reality testing. Because they just can't handle the trauma of the real world, they replace it entirely with confabulation and magical thinking. And by adulthood, this solidifies into psychotic grandiosity. Their emotional maturity is permanently arrested. The real self is, for all intents and purposes, dead, replaced by a ghost of grandiosity that constantly needs external validation just to exist. Which brings us to our final, frankly haunting thought from Karen Horney. The devil's pact. The neurotic's quest for glory risks sacrificing authenticity for an illusion of success, resulting in eternal inner turmoil. When we deconstruct these fractured minds, we see that the pursuit of absolute superiority isn't a victory at all. It's a permanent present sentence of inner turmoil. It leaves us with a heavy question to ponder. In our own lives, what is the true cost of the masks we wear to survive? And are we really willing to risk our own authenticity for a mere illusion?